Thank you for joining us. This program was started as a response to being virtual through the COVID years 2 years ago. And it was so popular that we thought we would continue it because people enjoyed what the program offered. It's a 3-part program that brings two New England scholars, and we have them with us tonight. Dennis Britton and Courtney Marshall. Courtney Marshall is an English teacher at PEA. She teaches, I think she calls herself a womanist teacher. She does classes under the title Jump at the Sun Fitness. Her classes are rooted in Black feminist teachings, and she brings Black feminism to many spaces in New Hampshire. Dennis Britton, who used to be here with us in New Hampshire, moved on to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, where he is a Shakespeare scholar. And you've seen them both at our events as we bring together our discussion on our poems. These events really are focused on African-American poetics tradition. Each discussion deconstructs 4 poems grouped by themes. Tonight's theme is continuing conversations. And we have a great guest poet to help us with that discussion tonight, which Dennis will introduce after we start. Our conversation centers around the 4 poems that we had to read for tonight. Nikki Giovanni's Allowables, Rudy Francesco's Mercy after Nikki Giovanni, Paul Laurence Dunbar's We Wear the Mask, and Maya Angelou's The Mask. Really looking forward to how we discuss these poems. This program really was to introduce us to some of our classic Black poets and introduce ourselves to new poets, such as our guest poet tonight. These tradition encompasses just all of Black culture, the love for words, our Black tradition, and our Black scholarship. So also with us tonight is a young poet who will be sharing a poem with us. Her name is Mary Olasore, I think. She is a 9th grade student at Phillips Exeter. She's originally from Newark, New Jersey, and it's school here in New Hampshire. And I'm going to pass this right on over to her in just a minute. I look forward to the conversations that we're having tonight, the deep discussion, and the real pleasure of listening to words and in the tradition of African-American poetic aesthetics. And without much ado, I'm going to pass you over to our young poet, Mary.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mary Olasore. As has been said, I am a 9th grader and I attend Phillips Exeter Academy. And the poem I will be reading today is an original poem titled Just Right for Me. My body bleeds red, just like yours. My hair goes out of my head, just like yours. I sweat when I work out. I shine when I speak. I walk with 2 feet. I run down the street. I move fully. Range of motion, truly. Honest, humble, rolling curves, touchdown, fumble, bunched up curls. I am short. I am tall. I am big. I am small. I am just right. In my eyes, I change like seasons, finding myself, elevating on a level that surpasses your expectations, your recommendations, your decisions, your self-made religion, your beliefs. You belittle me. You ask questions when you don't want the answer. You butcher and chop and not even meticulously. Slice through me with your preguntas and then reimagine me broken by your hurling words, stones that break my back. You ask, who am I? Me. Who am I? Me. Who am I? Nobody. That you should be concerned with. I am beautiful. I am brave. I am Black. I am a woman. I am strong. I am who God says I am. Shall I go on? Because guess what? My body bleeds red just like yours. My hair goes out of my head just like yours. Honest, humble, rolling, curves, touchdown, fumble, bunched up curls. I'm just right for me. So back up and let me take the front seat. Let me be the face of beauty for once. Don't steal my natural curls, my braids, my skin, my chance without letting me be in the spotlight too. Look at me and know I am beautiful. I am just right for me. My wild brown eyes burned with the melanin that sears my skin, scorches my breath, breathes ashes. Ashes on my person, broken, drunken, power, sunken, drowning, louden, persistent, dunking, tightening of ropes on my beauty and hopes, tearing of skin on my dark brown person, snipping of hair, rushes of air, and foul stanky breath fill the air as your fear and prejudice bleed with the stripes on my black back and the needle in my haystack and the crack in the sidewalk where sunlight shines and beauty blooms, no matter how many times you crush it, no matter how many floods you rush it with, no matter how many times you try to destroy it, no matter how many times you will force it to deploy it, hers. Her hair is hers, her body hers, her skin hers, her beauty hers, her love hers, her success hers, her God hers, she hers, me, you, us, we, honest, humble, rolling, curves, touchdown, fumble, bunch up, curls, broken by your hurling words. I cry when I hear the tears of others and break down when I feel the sting of their plead, when hair burns to straighten, beauty whitewashed to bathe in society's standard. Every fallen strand, no worse than every fallen man struck by a cruel hand. Cold fingers grip a hot weapon, stretching the black mane of truth, yanking at your beauty and confidence with brute strength, meant to be sent to loving you instead, hurt by. Goodbye, wannabe butterfly. I am the real deal. I rise on the horizon, but unlike the sun, I don't set. I keep fighting the prejudice that tries to force me to set down my knife. Clouded brains thinking it's to smooth their butter like hair when what I hold is a sword, ready to carve up the stereotypes polluting the air and beauty. For a plastic black version of Barbie, are you happy? Breaking my self-heart and self-esteem to rebuild your copycat, the one and only esteemed member of the planet, pasted everywhere, no diversity, no change in the air. Is that what you want? Because it should be what you fear. You lack the heart to live and provide for another of humanity. Just because their stride has bigger curves, shorter curls, a darker complexion. God made chocolate. Confusion? I don't understand what's confusing, that you can no longer hurt me with your stones that break my back. You ask, who am I? Who are you? Who are we? I am, you are, we are, us. Just right for us. What are they going to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was just awesome. And that gets us started on a just dynamic foot. And I'm just going to pass it right on to our scholars to just dig deep writing. Thank you, Mary. That was just brilliant. Thank you. Courtney, Dennis, you're up.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. We are just right for us. That line is those words are going to keep ringing in my ear. And I want to, invite you to join in this conversation too, because clearly, you're a quote unquote young poet, but you are a poet. So we want to hear what you have to say as well.
Yeah.
Hey, Courtney. Sorry.
How are you? I'm just sitting here just like, wow, I'm just blown away by Mary. I got to hear that poem earlier, and I just reading it is beautiful. But hearing the passion and hearing your voice, Mary, is just incredible. And I'm always so excited too, because Mary and I are from the same city, Newark, New Jersey. So I'm happy to see Newark represented up here at PEA. And so it's just wonderful. And so I'm so grateful to you, Mary, for your poem, particularly today. So in the spirit of Black poetry, one of our great poets, Audre Lorde, transitioned 30 years ago today. And so Audre Lorde became an ancestor. So I feel the spirit of like Black poetry in the room. So thank you so much for that. So,
Yes, yes,
and
indeed.
I like all the applause and stuff in the chat, which is excellent. Yeah, keep it going. You know, keep typing.
That's right. Oh yeah, I hope you're seeing all this love, Mary, in the chat. Yes, because yeah, it's definitely there. It's definitely there.
I'm glad, Mary, you got to share your family's here too. So I want to also say hello to Mary's family for being here. So thank you.
That is excellent.
All right.
I like what you said too, Courtney, about, and I know this is something a little bit later on, but you know, it is a privilege. I know I saw the poem too, had a chance to read it before, but it is something about hearing the poet's voice. And you know, we got to see Maya Angelou deliver her poem, at least in the link. There was a, you know, there was a recording of her reciting her poem, and of course, you know, Theo Wilson, our guest poet tonight, is also, you know, is a slam poet, you know. So I think there's something about the voice and hearing, you know, so not just reading, but also hearing that as part of this tradition that, you know, that's not the topic of tonight, but you know, it might come into the conversation. So. Right.
It could be, yes. And just being here, I mean, in our boxes, right? But being here with one another, right? I still feel connected. So yeah, so that's really okay. Oh yes, I see. Yes, Mary's parent listening from Jersey. Okay. Hello. I'm waving back to you. Waving back to my hometown. Okay. Well, all right. Well, let's hop into the poem. So again, I always want to start out with gratitude. So thank you to the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. Thank you to Gina and Terry and Mimi and just Jean, just everybody, just all the hard work. Then it's all the hard work that's gone into this, and careful planning and love of poetry. I'm grateful to everybody who's here tonight. I hope you have your poems close by, so you can also hop in and tell us what you think about these works. Also, thank you to everyone who came last week to our in-person event. There you were also supporting 2 young poets from Phillips Exeter Academy. And so again, as a teacher here at Phillips Exeter, I'm so excited to see so many wonderful poets here amongst our student body. So thank you for that. All right. I feel like I gotta stretch. Stretch and get ready. I'm always excited to talk about poetry, Black poetry, but I think tonight's, I don't know, I think of all the sessions, I think tonight is like one of my top two sessions. And I like them because it makes us, again, think about when poets pass on, right? They pass on, but their words are still here. And we can always go back and link back to them. And so I'm thinking, it's interesting today to think about, to have 2 living poets, right? But then 2 poets who have passed on, and that opening is still there for us to still connect with these words again and again and again. So let's see. What about you, Dennis? You ready to start? You want to talk about spiders?
Yeah, let's talk about spiders.
Talk about spiders.
Yeah. Allowables by Nikki Giovanni. And I do love what you also said there as well, right? You know, the way that poetry allows us to have conversations across time, right? So like we are able to have these conversations with poets who are now become ancestors. And then they're having current contemporary poets are having poets. You know, the conversation is just happening on so many different levels, and here we are having a conversation tonight. So, yeah, I do, and I love these poems. You know, and I always loved, you know, well, I love all these poets, but I love Nikki Giovanni. So, and I don't love spiders though. So I think that's one of the reasons that I appreciate this poem, right? I killed a spider, not a murderous brown recluse, nor even a black widow. And if the truth were told, this was only a small sort of papery spider who should have run when I picked up the book, but she didn't. She scared me and I smashed her. I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I am frightened. I mean, I love that because on the one hand, if I saw the spider, I would have killed it too, right? But of course, we know that this spider is, this spider is becoming a symbol for something more, right? In the way that, Giovanni is taking something that we all can relate to, right? Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe you love spiders, Courtney. I just so let me speak for myself.
Well, I'm gonna say, like, in our house, we couldn't kill spiders because we were raised with the Anansi story of Anansi the spider, West African stories about the storyteller. So growing up, we were taught never to kill a spider because you could be killing Anansi or Anansi representative.
I mean, I love that too. I love that.
Other bugs, but yeah, spiders were like off limits. You could never kill a spider. And I've used this poem in my classes. And I remember one time I had some students and they killed a spider in the class. And they saw it and then they killed it. And I made us stop. I don't even know what we were reading, but I made us stop and read this poem. But I feel you. I feel what you're saying though, that this poem is about spiders, on that surface level, but it's also about more. Like I read it as the speaker really stopping, and as it says, I don't think I'm allowed to kill something, but so the speaker stopping to think, what is it in me that made that my reaction to the spider? And so I love this poem because I think it invites the reader, both the person reading it out loud, the person reading it on the page, to put themselves in that position and to think about when I see spiders and when I see something that frightens me, that scares me, even though it's much smaller than I am, right? Why is my impulse immediately to kill it? And what might we gain by stopping and questioning that line of thinking?
Yeah, you're right, and I mean I loved your back to your comment about you were not allowed to kill spiders in your household, right? Because of stories that were West African storytelling, and so like that creates a sort of different orientation towards this particular spider. But I love what you said too. Is for me, you brought up I don't think I'm allowed, right? And like it's sort of the unthinking act, right? Of sort of like, oh, there's a spider. It's not, it's dead now because I saw it, right? And scary, harmless or not, it's just so automatic, right? Or it can be so automatic and unthinking. But at the moment that you get that thinking, you're like, well, why did the spider wasn't hurting anybody? It wasn't a threat to me, right? It's not a dangerous spider like the black widow or the brown recluse, right? Like those are spiders that could, do you some harm, right? If they bit you. But yeah, really, and I have to say, right, I did have to stop and think, well, why do I kill spiders when I see them, right? I mean, I think that's exactly the point, right? That there are just some things, right? That there's, so you had a story of the spider, right? I had a story, I had some cultural story of a spider, that spiders are bad, right? Or that they don't belong here in my house, right? You don't pay rent in this house, so you got to go, right? Whatever the stories that we sort of have and we bring to these things, or these objects, these creatures, right? These living things, right? That there are stories that affect, and we're not conscious of them. We're not thinking about them, right? And I have to say, right, that this poem made me think. I mean, it made me think about the spider, right? like on my literal, when I see a spider in my house next week, I'm gonna, or tomorrow, like I'm gonna stop and think about it. But at the same time, right, like that thinking about the spider leads to other types of thinkings, right? All the ways in which we sort of act and react, right? And like, there's no real reason to react the way and we do, except for out of some fear that's not unmerited, you
Mhm.
know? Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I think it leaves us open also to this notion that the line is that the spider should have run, but she
Mm,
didn't. And that's the thing that scares our speaker. That there's a set kind of dance that happens when you see the spider and you go to
yeah.
kind of threaten it, and then the spider is supposed to run away. So there's this lack of
Mm.
recognition from the spider that, oh yes, you are bigger than me, let me move out of the way, because as the poem says, it's not a murderous, brown spider or I'm sorry, brown recluse or black widow, which we could also say, does the poem also open up, an opportunity to rethink those spiders?
Right.
But I also think that there's this moment of, and I think when we get to the Rudy Francisco poem, this moment of real empathy, right? So where is this poem again, I'm thinking about that allowables, right? Where is it allowing us to enter into a different sort of relationship, a more empathetic relationship with the spider? But yeah, I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I'm frightened.
Yeah.
Which doesn't say that I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because it frightens me, right? So the whole the whole weight of the poem is on the speaker, right?
Yeah.
How do you see a spider?
Yeah, because I am frightened, right? Nothing by the actions of the spider itself.
Right, the spider's just doing spider things.
Right, the spider is just doing spider things. And I did love your point too, that in thinking about the papery spider, right? We also need to rethink the reaction to the black widow and the brown recluse too, right? Because they're just hanging out, living their lives too, right?
Right, trying to. And I think the Mercy picks that up, right?
Yes.
So Mercy, she asked me to kill the spider. Instead, I got the most peaceful weapons I can find. I take a cup and a napkin. I catch the spider, put it outside, and allow it to walk away. If I'm ever caught in the wrong place, just being alive and not bothering anyone, I hope I'm greeted with the same kind of mercy. And I love the way that the poem uses that word allow. It comes back, right? And so the person, the human in this instance, has the ability to show mercy, right? So an encounter with a spider is not just one of frightened, of fear and like, oh, I'm so scared, and oh, I must kill you. But there's a moment where you as it said, someone said, as Jimmy said, an epiphany poem, right? Where you can stop and you can learn the truth if you open yourself up to it. Right. So I love the ways that the poem, that the second poem, Mercy, brings in some of the words from the Nikki Giovanni poem.
Yes, right. So, yeah, so the title Allowables, right? The word allowed comes up in Francisco's poem, right? And it makes you, right? Of course, the whole scenario, is recalling Giovanni's poem, but even I love that the way in which even words, right, begin to move between poems. And of course, like we look at, later when we look at the Angelou poem and the Dunbar poem, right? Yeah, I think definitely we can talk more about that. Yeah, but I catch the spider, put it outside, and allowed it to walk away, right? Yeah, like the real acknowledgement, right, of the speaker's power, right?
Right.
That I mean, so first of all, like all the repetition of I in the poem, I, right? So a real recognition of, responsibility, of the power that the speaker has to show mercy or to not show mercy, to allow someone else's or something else's or another creature's life, or to deny it.
Yeah.
But then also recognizing, right, that's like there's, it's like, it's kind of a do unto others, right? I want, I would want and I would expect this same sort of mercy extended towards me, right? And therefore, why wouldn't I extend it to another creature, you know, another living entity?
Yes, yes. And I think like so many of the comments in the chat, I think, you know, folks are, I think, are very rightly saying that this poem can have, you know, bigger implications around, you know, society, around race, around, you know, how, as someone said, how white people see Black people, but also speciesism, right? What are the ways that we are conditioned to think, to have particular messages around bodies out in the world? And it makes me also think of, I was reading Star Child, which is a book about Octavia Butler, and talked about how Butler at one point looked in the eyes of a dog, and she was trying to like find like what is the point of empathy here. And so what I also appreciate about the Francisco poem is that moment of empathy is not just, you know, I'm a good person because I allowed the spider to walk away, but it really becomes this moment where the speaker says, I too can be in that same position as the spider. So I won't always be the person who gets to allow someone or allow something to pass, you know, unharmed, but I might also be the one who needs to be allowed to pass here. So I appreciate the way it extends that sense of empathy there.
Yeah. I'm in power now, but I won't always be the person in power, right? And recognizing, that we are in different positions, right? In different points in our life. And I love that, and I love you mentioning Octavia Butler and, you know, looking into the dog's eyes, because, you know, I wouldn't have thought about that about this. I wouldn't have thought about this. I'm like, what does it also mean to sort of, you know, to try to empathize with someone or something that is very different from you, right? Like, of course, right, across, you know, from human to, you know, to dog, or human to spider, right? That would seem to be a more radical, you know, distance to sort of cross imaginatively than we would hope is from human to human, right? So I love, you know, that, you know, you bring up Butler there, because, right, like, we know that ability to imagine, right, or need to imagine, right, or put ourselves in the position of someone or something that is very different from ourselves, right? So identification, not like, well, you're exactly like me and therefore, right? But like, no, we are very, very different. Like, you know, I have 2 legs, you have 8, right? And yet, I can see something. I treat you in the way that I want to be treated, right? And I recognize your vulnerability is not exactly the same as mine, but you have a vulnerability, I have a vulnerability, and therefore, right, a particular action is, you know, becomes ethical, right? It becomes required. See, this is why we talk about poetry. I mean, you know, I did my homework. When I'm talking to Courtney, I'm like, oh, this is good stuff.
I just love it. We deserve it. So let's shift, because I don't want to, you know, forget about Dunbar and Angelou. Oh, wow. I feel, I just sit and I just smile and I feel so happy, just full of these poems. I remember watching the video of Maya Angelou. I've seen a couple of videos of her talking about her poem. And if you didn't know, she talks about being on a bus in New York, and there was a maid on the bus, and she said every time the bus would start and stop and all these things would happen, and this woman would laugh. And finally, Maya Angelou says that she realizes that this woman is not laughing. She says that she is just like broadening her face, extending her lips over her teeth and making a sound. And she says, so she hones in on this woman, and she says that was that survival apparatus. And so it's from there that she says she wants to write a poem about this woman. And she says she connects, then she goes back to that Dunbar poem. You know, we wear the mask, that famous poem. So
I mean, and of course, like, this is like one of the most, like, you know, talking about famous African-American poems, right? Like We Wear the Mask is like one of those. And, I think, and yeah, and I listened, I heard, and I watched the recording that was part of the link, and, and I think one of the things that I got in performing it, right, is the sort of, like, what does it mean to laugh, right? And laughter as a mask, right? And, laughter, well, there's that sort of cliche that, laughing to keep from crying, right? That sort of that phrase, right? That I think, like I had to laugh, other words, I'd cry, right? And I think, that's becomes the trope that she's playing with, but really sort of building upon seeing someone laugh, right, does not necessarily mean what we think it means, right? Like, and of course, like we see someone laughing, and we would say that laughter on outside equals joy, happiness, amusement, right? But then, of course, what Maya Angelou says from her experience or from witnessing this woman on the bus is, right, no, that's not what it is at all, right? So I guess I'm sort of talking a lot now, sort of in circles, but one of the things I really appreciate about Maya Angelou's poem in conversation with Dunbar's is, right, is that I feel like Angelou's poem like reveals what's behind the mask in some ways, right? Like Dunbar's like, this is the mask, this is the mask, right? That Black people have to wear in this country. And then Angelou is like, let's look behind the mask, right? Using Dunbar's words, shifting words subtly, changing the line, right? Putting words that were in one line in Dunbar's poem on a different line. And I went to town on this poem. You probably can't see you can't see it, but I printed out, this is the English teacher in me, but I printed out the poem and I got my pen and I'm circling and I'm writing and I'm drawing. But this is such a sort of intricately crafted and gorgeous poem that is part of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see and again, Dunbar's We Wear the Mask is one of the, the most famous African-American poems. So I would say if you ever take a course in Black poetry, like you'll definitely have your Langston Hughes, your Gwendolyn Brooks, your Maya Angelou, and you will have your Dunbar. And chances are it'll be this poem. So Dunbar wrote poems like this, but he also wrote a great deal of what was called like Negro dialect poetry. And so during his lifetime, he I don't want to say struggle because I don't think that's the right word, but I think he and other poets were very aware of the ways that using what was then called Negro dialect was being used to confirm African Americans' inability to be artists, inability to be poets. But when we see other poems like When Melindy Sings, you can see how he uses that language and makes beautiful poetry out of it. And I like what you said about at least for me, the way that poem is a very like forward-facing poem. It's like showing the mask, it's holding up the mask. Mm-hmm. And I think that Angelou's poem comes along later, and the speaker in that poem has such respect, right, for the people who wore the mask. Yeah. So when there's the line, and then she shifts, she has this other poem for old men. But mm-hmm. At the end, in the middle, when she says, sugar, it was our submission that made your world go round. And then, later on, and calls them, my fathers. And at the very end of the poem, the last stanza, she said, they laugh to conceal their crying. They shuffle through their dreams. They step and fetch the country and wrote the blues and screams. But and then she says they kept the race alive by wearing the mask. So yeah. Wearing the mask or having to, have that outer face And then to grin when you don't want to grin. She says it's like scratching when you're not itching, like having this two-facedness is that survival apparatus. And so I see that second poem giving such respect to those folks who did it.
Yeah, yeah. And I love this, the wording of that, right? Because you can, the way in which Angelou like embeds like the voice of critique and the response. They say, but sugar, right? It's sort of like, so you could, like, it was our submission that made your world go round, right? So like, it's a response to a criticism, right? That it's older, that our fathers, right? That sat on benches, this older generation, right? Who didn't quote unquote keep it real, right? But had to sort of perform, right? In this case, as submission, right? This, calling it what it is, calling it, using Angelou's language. But even responding to that critique with kindness, which I also sort of mind, like, they said, but sugar, right? Let me explain to you, why it was the way it was, and why this mask was necessary, but also, right, that wearing the mask allowed for your world, right? Like there would be no world for you, right?
Right.
Without this mask wearing.
Right. And so this, again, this the way Dunbar talks about that line, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, that Maya Angelou then picks it up and thinks, what are the implications? What is the effect of having elders who have torn and bleeding hearts? And that's what they smile through. What is owed to them, eventually, at what point can they let that mask down, right? And so I see that poem, her poem also is about being a lot of vulnerability. When she talks about the old men being like nodding like candles, and their flesh, they're very thin. He said they're gnarled like broken candles, and so they've been used up, right, by the world. But they're still there to say that, it was because of what we did that your world was able to keep going. So I just think it's just another way, as we said earlier, about reaching back. So I also see it as one poet reaching back to another and being able to use that voice. So when we look at Angelou's, Maya Angelou's poem, we get that voice of the domestic, so that 70 years in these folks' world, the child I works for calls me girl, and to be able to to talk, to have that voice in the poem again is about honoring and elevating, and having that character's words right next to Dunbar's lines about the mask. To me, is just so powerful.
A real respect, you're right, and giving voice to mothers, fathers, the ancestors, our elders, right? And even in the way in which, of course, right, the poem begins with. It's interesting too. I was trying to think, and I was really trying to think about, well, what is Angelou doing with Dunbar's poem, right? Because on the one hand, if you read the poem, like if you've read Dunbar, right, Dunbar's poem, right? You read the very beginning of Angelou's poem, and you could think that it's a verbatim quoting of the poem, right? It's only when you put the two poems side by side that you realize that it's not an exact recitation of Dunbar's poem, right? And I was trying to figure out, well, what is going on there? Is this kind of the way in which, someone told me a story, right? Grandma told me a story, mama told me a story, auntie told me a story, right? And so the story is there, right? It's so much part of the family and the blood and the culture, right? And you almost always tell the story almost exactly the same, but not quite, right? Certain things begin to shift, certain words begin to change, the rhythm's slightly different, because the story is also somehow now your own, right? That the storyteller takes it, like, so that the conversation continues, but the new but the new speaker, right, who is telling the story also, is not going to tell it exactly the same. So, this was me trying to make sense of, thinking about this issue of conversation. Because clearly, right, she knows Dunbar, right? And I think you're right. Clearly, if you're a Black American, you're right, you've likely, well, Black American, have read any African American poetry, right? You likely have encountered this poem, right, in some capacity. But yeah, I guess I was trying to think through what is she really helping us understand about using his words that are almost his words exactly, but not quite his words exactly. And it made me think about storytelling and the ways in which stories get passed. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but it's one of the things that I thought was brilliant about the beginning the poem this way, and then sort of moving up, then departing from it, right? Moving into territory that Dunbar didn't cover.
Right, which I think is that internal shift from the laughing to the crying. So when we see her perform the poem, she starts out laughing, and she has these moments where she says, "I laugh, ha ha ha," and it feels fake because you've heard her talk about it. It doesn't feel like an authentic laugh or authentic enjoyment. And so what I think is that the enjoyment, if it can be called enjoyment, comes with talking to that younger person and saying, this is why we did what we did, and having that younger person really say that you kept my race alive by wearing the mask. And so I think there's a moment of one saying like, well, how long must Black people continue to wear the mask? But that there's more to thinking about masking than just what white people see, right? It's also about how do Black people look at other Black people, and when do they allow themselves to put that mask down? And what's gained by doing that, and that there can be a lot of hurt behind it, but also a lot of resilience. Yeah, it's beautiful. I love these poems, and I wondered, and it also makes me think about, who are other poets who have taken up the mask and taken up, or other types of artists who have taken up this idea of masking. And I think about Dunbar's poem "Sympathy," about the caged bird, and Maya Angelou comes along and talks about, I know why the caged bird sings. So again, there's all these spaces where I remember reading, and I now got to think of the author talking about police brutality. It was a Black person. They saw ants on the ground, and they said how ants have a way of being Black and letting themselves be like unseen. So I think there's just so many just really powerful resonances across these poems. Yeah.
Well, I wish we had more time, but we do have more time, but it's time for us also to open up this conversation and invite in our guest poet for this evening, Theo E.J. Wilson. So I will go ahead and introduce our guest and then invite him to join the conversation. So Theo E.J. Wilson is a founding member of the Denver Slam Nuba team, who won the National Poetry Slam in 2011. He's also known as the slam poet Luciferi. He began his speaking career in the NAACP at the age 15, and he has always had a passion for social justice. He attended Texas A&M University, where he obtained a BA in theater performance. Upon graduating, he interned as a full-time actor at the St. Louis Black Repertory Company. In 2015, he published his first book, 2017 rather, he published his first book entitled The Law of Action. And I also say there are just a number of fantastic, he's done a number of TED Talks, and you can find him reciting his poetry on YouTube. So please, you do make it a point to type his name into YouTube and to listen to some of his words there as well. But with that, Theo, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I don't know if there was anything in the conversation or that we talked about amongst these four poems that resonated with you or made you sort of go, huh, or I do that, or I don't do that, or that makes sense to me, or that doesn't make sense to me. So I just want you to join in I guess, as they say, get in where you fit in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that when Black people try to understand their oppressors, one of the levels that we try to really comprehend is the humanity aspect or lack thereof. And how could someone perpetuate this act? What was their thought process in the skin? If I could figure out their motivation, perhaps I could change their action. You know what I mean? And so I think you nailed it with the examination of speciesism. You know what I mean? Like, why would I so flippantly take the life of another living organism? And what does that mean about whatever bias that I have? Simply because its presence caused me some kind of fear. And so I think that that's the kind of self-examination that poets have, that perhaps maybe other professions do not have. But from the lens of somebody trying to really get a good grasp on like what it means to end a life or exhibit compassion in any part of the universe, that means that, it contributes to a larger conversation of how to change this oppressive dynamic. That's what I saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you definitely, I like, this your emphasis on, or your drawing attention to trying to imagine why, right? Like, why would so we have, in this case, why do white people, right, or oppressors act the way, now and in the past and historically, right? And that being a sort of ongoing question and an ongoing concern, and poetry, being one way, right, to sort of try to unpack that, or providing at least some answers to that really challenging question.
Got you. There's something that popped up in the chat. And Romney. Okay. Oh, okay. I didn't know I wasn't visible.
Okay, well, you're visible now. At least we can see you.
All right, cool. Everybody. Oh, here we go.
Right.
Hey, folks. What's going on? So yeah. I suppose that my muses are informed by the things that have made me examine my own humanity and the people who have considered me less than human. You know what I mean? The poet tries to unpack, I suppose, the human soul and figure out the interrelation between spirit and action. And that's why I always admire former generations of poets who really do a great job of doing that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I am humbled by them. And when I write my own work, I consider their contributions and what that poet meant for their time. And can I be that same thing for my time? You know what I mean? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I supposed to share my poems right now? Because
at any point, no, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just trying not to hog the screen because I was
okay,
cool. Courtney wanted to ask a question because I'll just keep talking. So I don't want to hog them.
I'm ready to hear the poems.
All right,
yes,
cool.
No,
cool.
Please. We're ready for your please.
All right, cool. Thank you. This first one I'm gonna share with you, and I think I'm only share like maybe 2 or 3 tops. Hold on, really quick.
Oh, sorry. We lost you, Theo.
Yeah, sorry. Here I go. So this first one I'm going to share with you is just based on a true story, and I'll let it tell itself. How about that? All right, it goes like this. Alonzo's birthday was the day before mine, so to make us feel special, our moms made us share a cake. He was a kid who always used his fingers for forks and the frosting for Spider-Man face paint. Well, these days, forks are no challenge, but birthdays are kind of hard for Alonzo. See, he hasn't had one since 2011, courtesy of Denver police, who snuffed the candles in his lungs with the taser shock. For every year of his life that he breathed, they said that his strength was superhuman, like Spider-Man. An altercation with the zoo rent-a-cop got out of hand. They treated the animals there more humanely. This Black man, taking his last breath yards away from African creatures in cages. And I know that there's a metaphor in there somewhere, but all I remember was his name on the news, wondering why some disturbance in the force hadn't warned me, wondering if the sound waves played tricks on the air, wondering if he indeed just walked through heaven's gates. why I wasn't the one greeting him there. See, 8 years before, the police handcuffed me to a chair and beat me like I stole the tax dollars I already paid them, my parents' investment in me in their crosshairs. Every gas mile, every meal, every storybook lesson rests in the hands of Uncle Sam's new slave patrol weapons. But when the beast spit you out alive, bathed in the sweat from the moment you thought would last before you died, who teaches you how to deal with regretting survival? When the shame at a second chance got you nearly suicidal, Alonzo, it should have been you writing this poem. Instead, I speak the ballad of another dead soldier. In this war we never asked for, old as history's pages, you and I, African creatures born into uniform, doing life in invisible cages. This is the ballad of another dead soldier, when the bullets kept going like their families had to, and ricocheting off the tombstones I keep as taste buds in the graveyard that sings in my mouth like I could somehow speak their alternate futures into this one, like somewhere magically right now, Trayvon Martin is a model. All 6'3" of his now chiseled frame, standing tall like the pride of his mama. Beer game on 100 like his daddy, clean, like Zimmerman's hands had he just followed directions. And somewhere right now, Oscar Grant is an actor alongside Michael B. Jordan, never knowing that he's staring at his movie reflection in Fruitvale Station. It's just another train stop. And somewhere right now, George Floyd's lungs never paused for a moment of silence. His heart never called in black between the beats. Instead, he screamed, "I can't breathe," from laughter that Christmas when his daughter got licorice stuck in her teeth. And somewhere right now, Sandra Bland just received her first nonprofit grant. She and her fiance expect a child next December, all because a cop swallowed his pride in a Texas traffic stop in an incident he barely remembers. See, these are the lives, and Black lives matter. The haters never hear past the Black, just get triggered from being awakened from their raceless slumbers, content with real destinies reduced to faceless numbers. And somewhere, Alonzo Ashley made it out of that zoo. And tragically, I made it onto the news, and this poem was never written, and you're not in these seats, just a candlelight vigil held at my tomb. But for reasons I can't name, I survived, here to eulogize the fallen, and I must go on coping with the guilt of being alive. Won't you join me while singing their songs, our voices ringing out like the Battle of Jericho, into the blue wall of silence falls, into the blue wall of silence falls, into the blue wall of silence falls. Thank you. And so that's that one. So yeah, I'm just I'm motivated.
Woo-woo, you just gotta hear some sound, man.
Yes,
Silence
yes,
is
right.
too much. Thank you so much.
Woo!
Wow, amazing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm happy to share that one. That took me years to write because I had to go through a lot of trauma to get it out, you know, but I'm glad that it's here now. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'll share one more with you and then we'll talk about them afterwards if there's anything you guys want to contribute, right? So we mentioned Maya Angelou, and the first poem I ever heard of hers was called "Still I Rise." And my cousin performed it at a Kwanzaa celebration when I was just a little kid. And so I said, well, let me continue the legacy. This is a little remix for the modern era. And this is called "Still We Rise." And it goes, and still we rise. Maya told me of the greatness we'll become. You know, you could take the Black man out of Africa. His heart beats still the drum. And America rose to the rhythm of my resilience. History's greatest survival story written while they was killing us by the millions, still Black and brilliant. You know, nothing supposedly inferior could survive the march from the interior. Plus the ships, whips, and shackles, plantations trying to put fear in us. But if you had to resort to whipping me viciously just to stop me from literacy, then this deadly pen is gonna be the enemy to white supremacy, rigging every system against me just to cop your green. The homie asked Diana Ross, you are not supreme. Imagine handcuffing a boxer and he still defeats you. With half the pieces on the chessboard, I just killed your queen, dude. If I slammed every door on Black folks and they dared to squeeze through, then it's just like Harvey Weinstein, I'd be scared of me too. Cause still we rise, burning bright as the eye of God when it bang light through the void, as black as the death of a sun, black like the kinks in Harriet Tubman's hair reborn as the rifling grooves inside Huey P. Newton's gun. I am a slave sorrow dancing off Ray Charles's fingertips. I am the cotton thorns in Mahalia Jackson's gospel rips. I am Louis' trumpet blending voodoo and Christ through cracked lips. I am MJ moonwalking over broken memories of blackness. I am surviving self-hatred even when preached from the pulpit, the kind that made Africans burn their kinks so they straightened to bullwhips. And if you look at how far we've come, you'll be so shocked that it'll leave you breathless, like the ghost of Thomas Jefferson at Obama's re-election. Give me the alchemy of a rapper taking the lead from the bullets inside of his body and melting them down. I want melting them down. I want melting them down in the platinum records for us. It's like Bob Marley rolling up and smoking Willie Lynch's ashes and exhaling the words of the first verse of Exodus, movement of the people. And this poem is dedicated to the in denial Black American that travels to Africa every time they step in front of their reflection, to the Latinos who carry African stolen gold and their complexions, to the Congolese women who were systemically violated and left alive due to tribal warfare, and the white kids who would rather die than repeat the crimes of their father's affairs. Stand with us. Sing a freedom song so clear it shatters the receiver inside Dr. King's wiretap phone, piercing the clouds and back down to the sound reverberates through the titanium and Malcolm's backbone, till Africans rise up from the Atlantic like goosebumps from your skin, lightning flashing like the flame from Huey's gun, burning bright as the eye of God when it bang light through the void, as black as the death of a sun, and still we rise. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Appreciate that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I did like, you know, maybe need a little tradition of people momentarily unmuting themselves to vocalize their praise.
Hey, what's up?
Nice to hear people's voices.
I
Yeah.
think that's a
Thank
great.
you. That was great.
Want more?
Want more?
They want more. They're like
Yes.
encore, encore.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm in a position where I would probably have to get right off of here if I did one more.
Okay.
So, because I don't know if y'all can hear my babies in the background. But they crying,
Yes.
so I gotta like get off here right after this. And I wish that there was time to discuss things, but I'll do this one. This is one I wrote for the kids. This ain't really for the grown folks. This is for the kids. And it goes like, this is called Impossible. And it goes like this. My student Tyreek walked in and he was like, yo, teacher, I want the finest girl in school to reject me just to see if I could walk off with my swagger still intact. I'm bad. My breath is like Egg McMuffin, double Dutching with double mint on my hopscotch tongue. My mouth is chalky. That's what confidence smell like. Girl, you tripping. I'm gonna be somebody, though I know I'm exhaling more high octane than a Hummer. But still, how can I ask for a record deal one day if I can't ask for your number? And if Thomas Edison failed over 3 times before inventing the light bulb, then can I use your cold shoulder as a hot stepping stone into history? I thought so. Impossible. And I said, Tyreek, impossible, said the horse-drawn wagon to the jet engine. Impossible, said the telegram wire to the text message, said the whites only sign to little Sasha Obama. Did you know that you will encounter at least 400 items a day that would not exist without Leonardo da Vinci, a man who did not see the inside of a schoolhouse until the age of 14? Einstein flunked beginner's physics in 1899. Dr. King packed a pistol before 1960, and you have a dream on the wrong side of a canyon called tomorrow, have cried the river in between, and have misplaced your climbing equipment. But just because something is impossible does not make it not worth trying. Who cares if the summit is unreachable if climbing that mountain makes you into one? You know, strangely, courage only comes after you do the thing that's scary. But ask David just how tall Goliath looks when he's on his back. You are a stone's throw away from being legendary. Angels have carved your statue in heaven and wait for a reason to ship it to earth. Don't let haters handle your postage. Believe me, my people know a thing or two about doubters. There was a time when the Negro brain was thought scientifically capable of inventing memory and nothing more, citing, quote, there is a physical difference between them that will forever forbid them from living together on the footing of perfect equality with whites. Abraham Lincoln. Now, as articulate as that may be, I believe the Black folks who invented the air conditioner, almanac, elevator, traffic light, super circle, cell phone, peanut butter, the pyramids, and fire will disagree. Mr. Lincoln, we got a wireless call from your ego. He said, emancipate that. Show me your impossible. Tell me it can't be done. I'll show you a climb to a height unreachable as a climb already begun. Impossible, says the cancerous tumor to its extinction. Says war-torn parts of Africa to their return to global glory. Says the shooting rampage to its pending place in ancient history. Says the oil company to sustainable being the new word for duh. Do these corporate executives know that we inhale at least 10 sextillion atoms with every breath, meaning due to global wind patterns over 1 year's time, you will breathe an atom breathed by everyone on earth and who has ever lived, meaning this poem is likely literally being brought to you by Shakespeare, Joan of Arc, Kennedy, Tubman, Dubois, Guevara, Yeshua, Yo Mama, and all of them asking, forget a millionaire who wants to be a mountain anymore. People who keep the script flipping more hardcore than parkour, reminding the haters, your failures are not my border patrol. My dreams ain't your dartboard. I want the finest minds in science to project my potential and see if they can walk off with their faces still intact. Well, I'm bad. My breath is like humanity, limitless, unbounded, and impossibly free. Thank you.
What?
Hey.
Thank you.
All
Oh,
right,
yes.
y'all. I wish I could stay, but I got to get back to the babies. So I appreciate you all for inviting me on here today, and let's connect soon. Jerry Ann and everybody got my contact information if you want to talk after this. And you guys have been wonderful, as my New England family always is. So yeah, it's dope.
Yes, we want you to come to Exeter. Come to PEA.
Hey man, you hit me up and let's work on that. All right.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us tonight. Thank you. We appreciate you so much.
No doubt, y'all. Y'all have a great day, okay? And
All
night
right.
or evening, wherever you're at. All right.
Thank you.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I know. Wow. 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 Wow.
Man, I'm so grateful. It's just it's amazing. And I'm always thinking about other poem writers, and I think about Alice Walker in Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and what would it have been like to be an artist in our grandmother's time. And I think about like that beautiful poetry we just heard, and that brilliant Theo, this brilliant poet, and I love how he brought up laws and edicts against teaching Black people how to read and write, and how forced illiteracy is so much a story, that story of American anti-Blackness. And so to think, what would it be like if that gifted man, right, was not allowed to use his gift, right? It's incredible. And I'm glad we got to cheer, which is good.
I do like that. Maybe that's a new practice from now on, right? It's nice to people to be able to voice their appreciation.
Let me ask: could people raise their hand or write in the chat the chat? That's a good question. Do you want to do hand raising, and then folks can say their question?
Yeah, we have a manageable group tonight. So yeah, folks.
That sounds right, Mimi?
Yeah, well, Kay Morgan has a question.
Okay.
To know if he has a book out. That's right.
Oh, yes. So he does have a book. It's entitled The Law in Action. And actually I will I'm not at all promoting Amazon, but here's just a link to the book from Amazon. So I'll go ahead and put that.
But I'm sure you go to like Water Street books.
Yes, exactly. Buy local, but at least you can get the title and the information.
Or get your library to buy it too.
Yes, that too. That too. Buy your own copy and get your library to buy it. All right, but that's a great question. A great question. Yeah, of course. Yeah, if you have questions, you want to engage in our conversation, yeah, go ahead and either put them in the chat or raise your hand. Mark, I see a thumbs up. I'm not sure. Maybe that's just a thumbs up. If it's a question, that's great. If it's just a thumbs up, right back at you. One of the things I really, I guess, appreciated, and I know when babies are calling. So I get that. I love that poem. Of course, it's heartbreaking, but the poem about Alonzo, right? And I was thinking about, I think in some ways it does remind me. It's not the same as the Maya Angelou poem, but in a lot of ways reminded me of the poet, like kind of the poet's calling of like speaking for, right? Speaking for people who may not be able to speak for themselves, right? Either because they are the victims of racial violence, past, historically, past, present, or they've gone on, right? I think Maya Angelou's poem is really voicing, right, giving us the voices of people who are our great grands, right, or our grandparents, and so on, even our parents, right, even us maybe some days of the week, right. And I just was also, had he stayed on, I was going to ask him, what is it about giving voice, right? Like, what is it about the way poetry is able to speak for, witness, speak for, let us hear the voices of people who can't literally, physically, temporally, right, in the presence, speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think there's a long tradition of that in Black literature. I think we go back to, I'm thinking about like the 19th century, somebody like Frederick Douglass, right, who starts out his narrative saying, talking about where he was born, but he says, I don't know how old I am because no one wrote it down, right? So the enslavers didn't write it down, but the enslaved can't write it down, right? Yeah. And so again, I think when we think about what the impact is of enforced illiteracy, right, you lack the ability to mark, the emergence, to mark the presence of this new baby. And then later on in the narrative, he writes about an enslaved person, a man named Demby, who gets shot. And then in the narrative, he goes on to say that, the person who shoots him does not, he's probably somewhere bragging about it, there's no punishment for it. But what I think is wonderful is that, yes, there is no memorial to that man. Like, that man is shot, he's in a body of water, he's shot dead, and that memorial is in that book, right? So there's a way that these books, and again, when I think back to Dunbar's poetry or Richard Wright's work, or the ways that they give voice, they introduce us to these people, but oftentimes they might be the only memorial, the only space, right, where you can actually sit to talk about Morris and to sit and think about the presence or the absence of these people. So to be able to read, to be able to write, right, to have a reading public is to have a space of celebration, a space of grief, right, that you get to control. And so I think that's another reason why these, everything from these poems, the way they then turn into murals, they turn into T-shirts, they turn into candles on a street corner, like all these ways. Or I think about EJI and those glass jars with the dirt from the lynching sites, right? These are these places where you get to stop and sit a while and actually grieve for these, for people. And poetry, I think, is so important for that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's the speaking for, but it's also the memorial for, right? It's the Yeah,
which might be the only memorial, right? The only person
yeah,
who kept that person's name, right? When I think about Douglas, the only person who kept that person's name written down, right?
right.
Or his poem about his friend Alonzo, right? Yeah, and I think what it gets complicated because now we have like television and we have news media and we have things like that. But it becomes this place for someone who loved him to sit down and think about him and grieve for him in a way that watching somebody on television or seeing their name in a news article doesn't do that same thing.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that maybe it's a distinction. It's not, the distinction is not the quite right word, but right, there's something fundamentally different than the cell phone footage, right? That, right, I think, right, in our particular day and age, right, that we have gotten used to sort of seeing, right, particularly around, the killings of Black people, that on one hand documents, right, but there's sort of a difference between sort of documenting something and really sort of memorializing it and taking the time to stop and think and give the life, right, meaning and personalize it. Like, yeah, this is not just, yeah, of course, right, those images are striking and then they have people have galvanized around them, right, but there's also something to, this was my friend, right,
Right.
and beyond the public, right, the publicness of some of this, the way the stuff has become public in our technology, right?
And I think it goes back to the poem about we wear the mask, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing to only have the world see you smiling and happy and pretending. But there is something quite different to see that vulnerability, right? Again, to think about that empathy, to think that I too may have lost someone, and to go back to the poem about the spiders. How was this child deemed, and all the people that he talks about in his poems, how are they deemed dangerous and how are they met with killing? And when he had the line about Sandra Bland and the police officer, right, who could have made a different choice. Right? And instead, she could be celebrating getting a grant, she could be celebrating, getting ready to have a baby, that they could be celebrating being with their families and living, right? So when he says like it's about the lives as well, I think it takes us right back to those earlier poems, right, about the spider. And because what's also interesting, again, to think about the mask and the spider, is that even when the spider wears the mask, it doesn't protect them from the dangers of the world. Right?
Yeah. Like, it's not a force field, right?
Right.
I'm thinking about the superheroes in Theo's poem, right? But yeah, like this, that like it protects in some ways, but it does not make us invulnerable, right? Like questions, comments from the.
Yes. Hop in.
Courtney and I do this for a living, but
I do. It's the best part, the best part of my day is talking about. I can't believe I get paid to do this.
Yeah.
Can someone talk about Mary? Is Mary still around? Or she's probably gone, but Mary's poems are so celebratory. They feel like they don't have a mask. They feel like they have, I feel like, Mary, your poems defy that they keep stripping things away till we all see the person. Because when you all were talking about poems, it seemed as if every poem was some kind of elegy. But your poem didn't feel like that to me. It felt very celebratory. And it was, the speaker was stepping into it and taking up all the space of it. It's a great poem.
It looks like Mary is here. I don't know if you want to comment, Mary?
Talk to him.
You don't have to. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't, when I wrote the poem, it was more of uh, it started off like as an accusation, then it was just something that grew into like a beat that was just really funny. I kept building on it, and then I built it around the identity of a Black woman, um, or a Black girl. So I feel like I hadn't been reading a lot of poetry lately at that time. So I feel like that really influenced me. But yeah, I do see how a lot of poems we've analyzed have been more of like um not celebratory, more of like, I don't know. Yeah, so I guess there is that difference, but I feel like underneath like these poems that there is this celebratory, like there's a celebration of like a silent power beneath every single thing that we've read. Like with Maya Angelou's poem, when she's talking about the woman the girl who calls her girl, or the young child that calls her girl, like there's this power. Do you need strength to be able to withstand that amount of like just blatant disrespect? So I think, and then the spider, uh she felt guilty, or she felt something after killing the spider, but she's able to go on and recognize her mistake. So there is still this like underlying beat of like power underneath everything that we read, and that celebration of that power and growing with it, and being able to grow from it.
Thank you. It was, I could feel the power. Yeah.
I just put in the chat, I got asked what my t-shirt, my shirt says. So it's a quote from Octavia Butler, famous science fiction writer. Brilliant, brilliant Octavia Butler. And so it says, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. So I would say pick up an Octavia Butler book. I just taught her story, Bloodchild, about humans, and they are off on a planet that's a lifetime away from Earth. And at the end, she asked, like, what is it that humans have that they could possibly trade when you're that far out, right? You know, what would you do to keep humans alive, right? To keep the species going. So it's quite a story. So.
I have to find out who your t-shirt supplier is, Courtney. You always have a great.
Oh my gosh. Always. I always have of something with some writing or an author somewhere on my person, usually on my shirt. It's a good reminder to me. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I had a shirt on today from Kiese Layman, a Kiese Layman quote that said, "Black people deserve beautiful sentences. We really, really do."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you're right. You know, I mean, I love that quote too, because I think, you know, this is reminding me of, I think of all the poems, right, including Mary's poem, right. This is not, you know, this is not particularly profound what I'm about to say, but I think it's always the sort of the craft of the beauty of the words, right? That is part of what makes these poems hit us and impact us, right? You know, there's just certain phrases that you just sort of like, they sort of stun you into sort of like waking up, right? And it's because they're sort of just so beautifully crafted. And I think Mary said something about the rhythm, right? Or sometimes it's the rhythm too. I definitely got that sense of rhythm from Mary's poem. And, you know, I think definitely there's rhythm in Dunbar. I mean, there's always rhythm in poetry, but when she was talking about the rhythm, I was also thinking about Dunbar's very regular rhythm, and then the way in which Maya Angelou also plays with rhythm, and rhythm itself being part of the conversation, right? And of course, if Theo was still here, right, you know, definitely as a spoken word poet and a slam poet, rhythm is definitely a part of that as well. So, you know, rhythm is also part of this conversation, in the way in which beat and rhythm and pacing and all that stuff affects how we hear and we pause and we understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess no, there's we have just a
Ah,
little bit more time. Any final questions? Final comments? Courtney? Oh, Jimmy. Look like we have a hand from Jimmy.
Yeah, this might be kind of a controversial question, but I was trying to research. There was a poet, a black poet, I think it was a woman who really never wrote about civil rights or anything like that or race issues and was kind of criticized for that. That she just wanted to write about flowers or something, and never deal with issues of race. And do you think there's pressure on black poets to always write about race issues?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of who that could be. Like, I'm really trying to think. I'm like, is it? I'm really trying to think. Like, who could it have been?
I mean, the one person I'm thinking, and it's not that she doesn't write about race, but I'm thinking Rita Dove. Like I felt like seen interviews with her. You're shaking your head, no.
But she wrote on the bus with Rosa Parks. She's coming to Phillips Exeter in the winter. She'll be here.
Yes, yeah. So but so she definitely has, but I feel like she's addressed some people saying that some of her poetry didn't feel enough about. Right, because if you read some of her poems, right, you can say, what does this have to do with race, right? So again, like, maybe I'm not sure. So this is probably not who you're thinking about, but I feel like I've read something about her talking about that issue at some point.
Yeah, well, what about that general idea? Do we know many black poets who have really avoided race issues in their writing?
Well, I think so. I mean, I go way back to, the beginning of the 20th century, late 19th century, when people like Dunbar were writing. And later, before the Harlem Renaissance, right? So people like Du Bois, right? And NAACP, and how a lot of those organizations had like literary contests and literary journals. And there was conflict during that time about, should the black poet be writing in a way that uplifts the race, right? And I was reading a Dudley Randall poem today, just randomly in a book, and it was saying the poet is not a jukebox. You don't get to put in a quarter and tell the poet what to write. So Dudley Randall, Randall, the poet is not a jukebox. I just saw the title. I was like, oh, that sounds really, really nice. But I think the tension isn't so much about, do they talk about race, as much as how do they talk about race, right? So if you're writing about, say, middle-class characters, you're writing about assimilation, upward, racial uplift, and you have these characters in a positive light, right? Then, okay, like, great, you're doing great for the race, beautiful, right? And again, these were real arguments that folks had. But then you have other writers like, Hurston, my favorite, or people like, Donald Goines, or, things that are more popular, right? And the question is, are they giving literature that uplifts the race? And a lot of writers say, like, I'm not obligated to write the way that the Black intelligentsia wants me to write. I don't write the way that, someone like, Barack Obama wants me to write in this particular way, or Jesse Jackson wants me to write a poem where, Black people are, I don't know, doing whatever they think Black people should be doing, right? I have a right to express all the parts of myself. But I would argue there are people, and I'm thinking about a Nikki Giovanni poem where it says, like, I just want to write about flowers, right? And Black arts people, they're like, this is not the time. We don't have time to write about flowers right now. It's immediate, put that, we'll write about trees later. But so I think that this tension between, like, what is the role of the artist? What is the role of the artist in a larger racial kind of justice movement? I think it never goes away. Yeah. It never stops. But then we also have to think, like, why is it that the Black writer has to write on behalf of everybody? Or the woman writer has to write on behalf of everybody, and they don't just get to say, I want to write about trees because I write about trees. But then if you get somebody like J. Drew Lanham, who I was just reading about, he won the MacArthur, he's an ornithologist, he writes all about birds. And he's a Black man writing about birds. And yet still he talks about Maya Angelou in The Cage Bird. He talks about the crow. He talks about the blackbird. He writes about what it's like to be a Black birder. So even when you're writing about birds, you know, there's still a way you're still writing about Blackness.
Do you remember that incident with the black bird watcher who he scared a white woman who was also right? That pretty famous incident, right? He didn't really want to talk. He just wanted to go bird watching, and some bird watching groups invited them in and worked on bringing in more black bird watchers. I thought that was a good way to handle it. That they realized that their groups are all white, so they tried to see if they could get more people in and spread bird watching to other people. And I love that, the way that he handled it himself. He didn't want to deal with the whole fight with the woman, the crazy woman. He just wanted to
like, just let me watch my birds, right? Well, I think it's also an interesting question just to picking up about this. It's also, how is Black poetry read, right? On the one hand, like Nikki Giovanni just writing a poem about spiders. Like, she didn't say nothing about Black people. She didn't say anything about white people in that poem. She was talking about spiders, right? But at the same time, right, you know, it's also the ways in which we project onto these poems, right? And of course, like, it's really hard for me to say, like, you know, as a reader, I think it becomes very difficult for me to sort of say that this poem is only literally about people's being nice to spiders, and the only message I'm supposed to take away from this poem is about not killing spiders, right? Like, it becomes very hard for me to sort of say that. But I also have to recognize that, you know, this is the way in which, you know, we all live in a racist culture, right? We're all sort of living in the history of race, that it becomes difficult not to sort of read Black poetry, read Black art, right, through that history. So you're right. So yeah, so I think you're right. All these things are complicated by all these things. Yeah. Garth, I see your hand, and then we're actually almost out of time. So this might be the last question, and then we'll wrap up our conversation.
Actually, I'm Liz. This is under my husband's name, the computer.
Oh, okay.
But I just wondered if there's a change in the tone of the times, because all these poems tonight, suffering, there's a lot of suffering. But in Mary's and Theo's, there's outrage and pride. And Maya Angelou also has pride and outrage, but it's much more understated. So I wonder if there's like, Black people are feeling more like, what the heck? They're just going to tell it like it is. I don't know. Just a question.
I think the brief answer is, I think the themes that we see in the contemporary poets, we can see in earlier poets too, depending on who we choose. So if we had, you know, a Frances Harper poem, or, you know, a Gwendolyn Brooks poem, right? A Yusef Kumunyaka poem, right? I think we could find Jane Cortez. I think we could find a lot of those same elements. And that's why I love the way that this series gets us to just read more and engage more. And you can see that there were people who were about it, you know, back then. You know, when you read When Melindy Sings by Dunbar, and he's like, Miss Lucy, you can't sing like Melindy. You need the book and the notes. Melindy, she cooks, she just opens her mouth and it's beautiful. And as long, you know, you reading the books, but you can't do it like she can. So I think there's always been that, but I do think that the rise of streaming, certainly the rise of social media, being able to get to poets more immediately, to think about your audience in a different way, not relying on patrons or publishers in particular ways, I think that does have a big impact.
Thank you.
Excellent. Courtney, it's been a pleasure, as always, having a conversation with you, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation about African-American poetry. And thank all of you for being with us tonight. I also just want to remind everyone that, yes, this conversation will continue. Our next event will be on December 15th, and for that, please remember to register on our website, and our guest poet will be Marilyn Nelson, so you definitely don't want to miss that. Mary
Nelson poem before.
Yes, that's right.
About George Washington Carver.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh yes, we can say we've encountered Marilyn Nelson, yeah, in the program before. Yeah, great, great. Mary, thank you so much again for your poem. Thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to more of your poetry. I know that there's more poetry from you to come, so we're excited to see that coming from you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Black Heritage Trail, and we'll see you next month, if not before.